farm school, a free school at age 7 where I was allowed to curse. And that's a whole story that's hard to explain to people. But we were all allowed to curse. And that's true. And we wrestled and we didn't do math. It was wild. It was like some hippie world thing. And for about 2 weeks, we did 80 hours of figure drawing, which is the equivalent of an entire college semester or more. We'll learn to draw. Well, my name is Tom. My last name is Walton. I moved to America when I was a baby. Basically, it makes me American, but with English parents. But I moved to a strange part of America called Washington, D.C., which is the nation's capital. And that's where I grew up. I say it's strange because actually the African-American population, they've been there for a long period of time. I always felt sort of like I belonged because there's a lot of people who weren't from there. But I also felt like I didn't belong because my parents were from England. And I don't know if this is true for artists. I think most people choose something like art because they have something they need to express. And I say that need part because I think that honestly everybody probably could benefit from making art. But in our contemporary society, they don't really encourage us to make art. They maybe encourage us to buy a form of art in the form of television. Watching sports can be art, right? If anything, I almost think that when people get into art, people they treat it as though you are doing something sort of wrong or weird. You know, it happened to me. But I made art because I needed to make art. And part of that was because I was like, who am I in the world? You know, I'm like moving from England, and then my parents got separated when I was 4. Usually whatever trauma exists in the family is sort of elevated and brought to the surface. So I had to deal with my parents' trauma, and I sort of then had some need to make art. I mean, the cool thing about art is the need came from the fact that it's very healing. So I needed to make marks. But my first start of art wasn't like painting like museum art. Even though I would go to museums because I was lucky growing up in DC. But there was, of course, cartoons on all the time. And I had friends who were drawing in class. And once I saw them doing it, I was like, oh, that's really cool. They can draw faces and cartoons. And I was like, I'm going to do that too. And I did it, and I was like, can I do it, first of all? And I was like, oh, I can if I practice. And then I practiced and practiced and practiced, and I became sort of addicted to it. And it was that in combination with the feeling of the mark making that helped me work through the complexity of being a young person trying to figure out what was going on.
How many hours did you spend when it became a habit of drawing?
Well, so there's 2 main phases. The first phase was 3rd grade. My friend Nico Matsakis got a cartooning book. And I'm like, whoa, that's cool, I want to try that too. And I did. And it wasn't like I was that much naturally better than him, but I just got into it. I started practicing all the time. Before I knew it, I was completely overtaking him. But I didn't know the time. Like, you know, when you're a kid, you don't know. Like, I guess I've been doing this for 8 hours because it just consumes you. And sometimes you do it for a couple hours and you go like, I don't know, play soccer outside or something. But it just, back then I was less aware, but I suddenly wanted to do it all the time. So I was drawing in my room all the time, I was making my cartoons, but I was also really concerned about how could I do this? How could I make a living? My dad was very professional, my mother was an artist, but she wasn't making a lot of money from it, for example. So I was like, how am I going to survive? This thing I discovered I needed, I was like, well, now I need it, I better find a way to like continue to do it. But then later, I was a cartoonist, and I was about 16 in high school. My school had this thing called a work internship program, small private high school in DC. I also went to about a gazillion different schools. My dad's job paid for me to go to private schools if I wanted to. My mother was sort of an education-oriented person, and I had what could be classified as learning disabilities. I had dyslexia, and what I think was more trauma-induced ADD, so I couldn't focus in class. Because of that, my mom was experimenting with pretty much every school. God bless her. Like I went to 2 different public schools, farm school, a free school at age 7 where I was allowed to curse. And that's a whole story that's hard to explain to people. But we were all allowed to curse. And that's true. And we wrestled and we didn't do math. It was wild. It was like some hippie world thing. I don't know how to explain it. Then the school closed after that 1 year for reasons that maybe make sense. But then I went to public school and they put me back a year because they were like, well, you wrestled and cursed for a year. But my final and probably best iteration of schools was a school called the Field School, it was better before than it is now. It used to be a very small school that was very student-oriented and teacher-oriented. So we didn't have big facilities. but we had great students. Student to teacher ratio was small, so we had real experiences.
Right.
And it was really about learning and learning to learn. It wasn't about grades in the typical sense. One of the things they did was they had a work internship program. So every year, every student had to go get work experience to like learn to be in the world. Took 2 weeks off of school and went and volunteered somewhere. First time, when I was a freshman, I worked in a preschool because I always kind of had childcare in me, weirdly, you know. And people wouldn't catch that from looking at me, but I took care of my brothers. Second year, I was already into art, and my mother had met this man called Carlo Pittori, who was the mentor of my stepsister, Clarity Haynes, who's a painter, and her work was in my stepfather's house. So my mother remarried when I was about 11 and moved into my stepfather's house. You know, there's something special about when you see paintings that look like they could be in a museum but not in a museum, and you know the person who painted them, you're like, whoa, I can do that. Somebody did that. It's like magic.
Right.
But I thought, no, I'm just be cartoonist, this thing called talent, I've got it. The paintings, I'm gonna admire them, but I'm not gonna make them. My stepfather had met Carlo, which was her teacher, at Yoko Ono's macrobiotic restaurant in New York City. It was the 60s, I think it's okay to say this because it's legal now. They went to go smoke pot together. They became friends, and then later he taught Clarity. And Clarity, of course, had talent to begin with. And I was like, I'm gonna go work with Carlo for my work internship program. We took a Greyhound bus, 4 cell phones or anything. Got there, and for about 2 weeks, we did 80 hours of figure drawing. 80 hours of figure drawing, which is in 2 weeks' time, which is the equivalent of an entire college semester or more. We'll learn to draw. So then every night he made me do an hour-long self-portrait, and then I posed for him every night, like, you know, clothed, appropriate, 16. And then also he did a painting of me, you know, which I still have. Just an awesome painting. He did it to me when I was 16, and I was like, whoa, talent's not real. You can learn this stuff if you have appetite. And in 2 weeks' time, I was like, wow, I can do this thing that I thought I couldn't do, but it was talent. And I was like, I want it. So I came back that summer and I lived with him for 6 weeks in a yurt. This all sounds fictional, but it's true. And I pay him. And I drew 9 hours a day. And then I was like, that's it.